Well, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar about working as speech and language therapists in prison healthcare. Firstly, our sincere thanks to our partners, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, for their support. And thank you to all of you who've sent in questions. We've had lots of them, and we'll aim to address as many of the themes that have been raised in those questions as we possibly can over the next hour. We'll also try to answer the more detailed questions you've sent us in the Q&As. Well, just to let you know, we are recording this session, so you can look at it again later if you'd like to. We have a panel of experts for you this evening, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in turn, starting with Dr. Kim Turner.
So thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Kim. I have been a speech and language therapist now for 20 years. So I went straight into a role in forensic mental health when I first started. And since then, I've then worked in young people and young adults prison setting, adult prison setting, and now I work at a university doing research into all areas of the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Kim. And now to Eve Brotzel.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Eve Brotzel, and I was similar to Kim. I qualified in '99 and worked more generically in mental health to begin with. And I've had a variety of different jobs. Came out for a very short stint in neurology and then went back into forensic mental health in about 2013, and I've been there ever since. So worked in prisons and secure settings.
Thank you, Eve. Well, we're also hoping to be joined by Midge Cameron. She's a speech and language therapist with the North London Mental Health Partnership. We have one or two technical difficulties, but we're hoping Midge will be with us very shortly. Now, our first questions are on a general theme, and I'm going to address them to each of our panelists in turn. I wonder if I could start with you, Eve. Why did you choose to work in forensics?
Good question. So I suppose I'd worked for a long time in mental health more generally. So I'd kind of had a sort of an insight into mental health from that. I've always been interested in forensics, and it's a really fascinating group of people that you work with. They often call it being a specialist generalist because you see a whole array of different clinical presentations and needs, and you are really kind of put to the test because you have to kind of work with so many different teams and work with the person, but also work with their kind of risk and work with the team supporting them. So it's a really complex and very kind of challenging and stimulating kind of clinically area to work with.
And you clearly enjoyed it and still enjoy it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, like I said, I came in 2013 and hadn't looked back. And yeah, I think my career is now with forensics.
What about you, Kim? Why did you choose to work in forensics?
So as I was training, I went on each placement and I was like, oh, this is the area I want to work in. And then the next placement was like, oh, and that's one of the beauties of speech and language therapy, is that there's so many different areas. But in my final year, we had a guest lecture from Sarah Kramer, who worked in forensic mental health in North London. And it just opened my eyes up to a field that I didn't realise existed until that point. And she talked about her clinical life and what that involved. And I just thought that is a great fit for me. I was volunteering in mental health at the weekends as I was training. I knew that was a field I was really interested in, but didn't realise it was an opportunity within speech and language therapy. And then it sounds very worthy, I'm afraid, but I wanted to give back and help. And I believe that often the individuals that we're working with in the forensic system, in criminal justice, are those that have often been really failed by society more broadly. And it's horrible and corny, and I hate myself for saying it, but it's a real privilege to be able to give something back.
And you know, Kim, I'm sure there are people watching this webinar now who are having that almost light bulb moment hearing you speak. What would you say to them if they're thinking, do you know what, I think this might be for me? Do
it. I mean, if you're really passionate about something, you will find your way to it. It's likely to be more of a long game, because I know we're going on to talk about this, but it might not be that there's opportunities straight from graduating. I was fortunate that I did. So towards the end of my course, I saw a band 6 post come out in forensic mental health post. So normally when you qualify, you go into a band 5 post, but this band 6 post came out and I was like, oh, I just ring up and speak to them. So I was really fortunate that I rang up, I spoke to the manager. They invited me to come and visit the service for a day. I met with them, talked with them about my background. I got to see what it looked like in practice. And at the end of the day, the manager encouraged me to apply, and they created a development post. So I did go in as a band 5. You need to go in as a band 5 and do your NQP competencies. So I went in as a band 5, but then the agreement was as soon as I completed those competencies that I would then move in to a band 6 role without having to interview for it. It was the first time they'd done it. It was a learning curve for both of us, but it worked really well. Oh, hi, Midge.
There we are. We can see Midge now. Midge Cameron, lovely to see you, Midge, and thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we had a few technical difficulties there, but would you like to introduce yourself to everybody, please? You just need your microphone on as well, please.
Hello, everybody. I am so sorry. Yeah, I do beg your pardon. We've had some issues here, tech issues. Thanks, Will. I'm just thanking my son here. So yes, my name is Midge Cameron, and I'm what we're doing. Just giving a short 1 minute, Rob.
Yes, please, if you would, that'd be lovely.
Okay, just let me turn my volume up. So yeah, my name's Midge Cameron. I'm a speech and language therapist. I qualified as a mature student about 20 years ago. I've worked in various areas, worked in a community neuro team, as well as in a mental health team, and I've been working in forensics for about 4 years.
And can I ask you the question that I've asked your colleagues on the panel? Why did you choose to work in forensics, Midge?
So I spent quite a few years working in a community neuro team, decided that I wanted a change, and I moved into, as I say, working in a mental health team. And then that was primarily focused on dysphagia. And then I saw an advert for a job working in a prison, and I thought it sounded interesting. So I thought it sounded interesting working in a prison, and I suppose, like everybody else, I was quite aware of all of the statistics around the need and the high percentage of people involved with the Justice Centre service who have got speech, language, and communication needs. So yeah, that's kind of my route.
Fascinating. Can I come back to you, Eve, a moment?
Yeah.
We're talking about working in prisons. Can you give us an idea of what it's like to work in a secure environment like a prison?
It's funny when you tell friends and family about prisons and secure settings, they're always, the first line is always, isn't that quite scary, or do you not feel afraid? But actually, once you're in them, working in them, it's not like that at all. My experience is really that there's really very good teams. So that, there's no getting away from the environment being quite difficult, especially in prisons. They're not the most sort of sophisticated buildings and so on. But that said, they usually have quite dedicated people working there, and there's a really good team spirit because people pull together to help each other. So my experience is that they're quite lively. There's quite a lot of banter. You can get on with, you've got your immediate healthcare team, which are quite, really dedicated members of staff. But then you've also got the kind of wider prison officer team and probation team, and so on. So yeah, they're lively, interactive, fun environments.
Nidge, what would you say about working in a prison environment?
That made me laugh when you say it's a fun environment, Eve.
There's a lot of banter, isn't there?
There is a lot of banter. There is a lot of banter. Yes, I suppose it is. Yes. Yes, there is a lot of banter. Similar to Eve, really. It is. It is challenging. We know it's challenging. We see it in the news every day, don't we, about prisons and the state of prisons. But yeah, there is that team spirit, both within healthcare and also, with the other departments as well, prison side.
So, I mean, it is different, isn't it, from working in the community, but there are similarities as well. Is that right?
What we try to offer is a community service within a prison, and actually we often kind of make better waiting lists than the community, which we're quite fortunate. So I know that we're currently offering an autism assessment service, and in the community I think that's many years long now if you're waiting for it as an adult, but in the prisons we're getting that done within sort of 6 to 9 months. So you've got all your community facilities. You've got a primary healthcare team, you've got a mental health care team, you've got a neurodevelopmental team, you've got GPs, physiotherapists. So it is kind of like a community service.
Mm-hmm. Kim, can I ask you, what are your thoughts about working in a prison environment?
I think the thing that I'd add that Midge and Eve haven't said yet, and one of the things that students and family often say to me is, isn't it scary? And what I would say is everyone is so risk aware that actually it's a far safer environment than a lot of other environments. After having been locked up for so many years, I have fear about community. So if you go into someone's home to do an assessment, you don't know who's going to be in that home environment. You don't know what the risks are. Whereas if you're working in a prison environment, everyone is very risk aware and well equipped. And I would definitely say that it's one of the safer places to work. That's not meaning that you won't see conflict. You will. And it isn't for everyone, but it is a safe environment because of the risk awareness. The other thing I'd say is that Midge and Eve have already sort of touched upon it, is that opportunity for real close interdisciplinary working. One of the things that I really enjoyed about working in that prison environment was working with the prison officers, working with education. If a young person was working towards release and they were building their work skills, and they were in the building workshop getting their card so they could go onto a construction site, I could then be working with them with some really functional skills to support them with interviewing and linking in with the local job centre where they'd be going to around that support. And doing those, often in speech and language therapy, it is assess, advice, post someone onto the next person. There's a real nice opportunity often within the prison environment to do some more in-depth work, really functional skills, get to know someone really holistically, know what that is important to them, and be able to do real life work that's going to have a meaningful impact for them moving forward.
And just picking up on that, Kim, and I've just seen a question that's come in, and I just wonder if I could address it to you. Did you have an external supervisor for your first year of training when you went into a prison?
So when I first started in my first prison post, it was a brand new created post. So I went in, I created what the service was going to look like, which was a great opportunity. I mean, my first post had been amazing. They had a wonderful service, but there was lots of things like, oh, I don't know that I want to do it like that. I got the opportunity to create the own service. But one thing they hadn't thought about was supervision, and absolutely I needed supervision. So initially they said, we'll give you supervision from psychology within the prison environment, but I insisted that I also needed supervision from a speech and language therapist to talk about speech and language therapy cases, and we were able to get that arranged with the local service. Supervision is really key for any speech and language therapist. And yeah, it's one of the things when students are applying for jobs that I'm like, make sure the supervision is in place.
Good advice. Thank you for that. I'd like to turn to a question now, which I think is probably at the back of most of our minds, particularly people who don't work in mental health care in prison. It's this, and can I start with you, Midge, with this one? How do you care for people who are considered to be hard to care for?
So when you talk about hard to care for, do you mean because they're prisoners and they've committed offences?
Yes.
Yeah. That is a great question. That is a great question, and I wondered when I first started working in the prison service how I would be with that. But essentially, I don't always find out what somebody's offence is. Sometimes they tell me, sometimes they don't, and that's their choice. I think the people that we work with are, when you get their story, when you hear the background, their childhood upbringing, the trauma, the services that they haven't been able to access, you can kind of almost see how they've come to be in prison, and that just sort of helps, really. It's almost like, yeah, I can see why you committed this offence, and you can empathise with it.
You come to understand the person rather than
the offence. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Kim, what about you?
Well, unconditional positive regard is something that we should be giving to everyone that we work with, no matter what environment we're working in. We should be dealing with the individual that's presenting in front of us. It's not up to us to judge their life around that. We're there as speech and language therapists to think about their speech, language, communication, swallowing needs. Now, that's a nice buzzword that some people find easier to do than others. I'm quite good at compartmentalizing, so I do find that relatively easy. Unlike Midge, I would always know the individual's background before I saw them. I had access to prison systems, and that was my choice in order to feel that I was keeping myself as safe and I was prepared as I could be around triggers. I would know exactly what it was, but I was able to then just put that to back of my mind and then deal with the individual in front of me. When I first started working in the area, someone did say to me, there will always be someone who'll come along at some point that their offence or something about them is too close to you and you will struggle to work with them. And that is when supervision comes in, and it may be that you decide that you're not the best person to be working with that individual and you work through others, or if you've got a team, then another member of that team can work with them. I've certainly worked in a team where an individual has offended against small children. I don't have small children, and therefore I opted to work with those individuals rather than members of our team who had small children, and maybe that would be too triggering for them. So yeah, there's lots of different things, but we really should be treating individuals as individuals rather than their background.
Thank you, Kim. Can I turn to you, Eve? How do you care for people who are considered hard to care for?
Well, I mean, very similar to what Midge and Kim have been said. I think when you've worked in it for a long time, you do kind of put that to one side, the offence really. And I think where it can be actually quite fascinating for us is where the offence kind of crosses over because of their communication needs. So certainly in the prison I worked in, many of the guys there had offences to do with stalking, or how they were kind of approaching dating, or I don't know, relationship kind of difficulties, and many of the offences were really related to the communication need. So they didn't understand the rules of how you would go about seeking a partner, how you'd approach a woman, and kind of knowing the boundaries of stopping, you know, when you're approaching a woman to go out with them and things. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the work, because you are directly kind of supporting them with skills not to offend again. Whereas it got quite tricky in my prison. It was the remand prison, and so you sometimes couldn't go near the offence because you're not meant to interfere before they've had the court case. In sentence prisons, that's more available to do that kind of work, and in secure settings as well.
We've talked about working within a prison. I wonder if I could turn to you, Midge, here with a question which I think is probably quite pertinent, and it's this: what safety measures are in place to protect a speech and language therapist and service users?
So I suppose the first thing to say, as Eve said earlier, is, you know, that everybody is very focused on risk. So I would probably say that I've never felt unsafe, or I've never felt unsafe. We have got, so like all healthcare systems, you know, we've got alerts when you first look at somebody's record. You can see what if there's anything up there, so you can maybe go with somebody else, have a joint visit, you know, a joint appointment. There's very physical things, so the rooms. So I will either see people in the healthcare in the clinic, or I might go onto the wings and see them in rooms there. Each room has got a button that you can press if you're feeling unsafe. Press that button. I've never pressed that button, but if you press that button, there'll be 10 prison officers there as quick as you can blink. I've had training. I've had some training in self-defense, spear training, and other things, you know, like conflict resolution. Yeah. As I say, I don't feel unsafe. Have I missed anything, Eve?
No, I don't. I think it depends on the setting you're working on. So secure services, you kind of might get more involved in restraint, but in prisons, really, the prison officers are there for kind of supporting you with any real physical kind of threats, which again hasn't happened to me. And they're really in their role, they've got great vigilance. They're always looking out, and they're kind of very good at spotting any signs of difficulty. But often, you know, the prisoners see us as helping them. So you know, all the prisoners that I've worked with, mainly, you know, very grateful for seeing you. They know that you're trying to work in their best interest. They want to engage with you. So you have a very different role than the prison officers in the prisons. Yeah.
Eve, I wonder if I could just stick with you a moment and ask you what it's like day to day for a speech and language therapist working in a prison setting.
And I mean, Kim touched on this. I mean, it's hugely varied, and that's one of the real bonuses of the jobs. Every day is quite different, and that keeps it fresh and keeps the weeks, you know, really flying by. I mean, it really is very good. Fundamentally, you've got kind of probably a mixture of sort of direct work and indirect work and meetings, consultations. So some of the direct work will be doing some assessments, interventions, but like Kim said, you can make it really functional, and actually often you do have to make it really functional, because the guys will want to know straight away, why are you doing this, what are we working on, and you've got to make it really pertinent to their life to engage with them. And fair enough. You might be working with someone's healthcare team to help them to be understood. You might be working with someone's probation worker to kind of help them understand their communication needs, and for them to be able to sort of evaluate their risk in terms of communication. In the remand prisons, again, maybe slightly different in the sentence prisons. Unfortunately, that's a time when people are experiencing a great deal of uncertainty. They don't know when their court case is, they don't know what's happening, that might be their first time in prison, so there can be a lot of risk to self, and certainly speech and language therapists get involved with that, especially if someone's neurodivergent. Prison officers are not always very good at interpreting risk in neurodivergent prisoners, so speech and language therapists can get very involved in supporting that person to express their needs, to express how emotionally they feel. I'm trying to think what else they might do. There's training needs, so you might be involved in training. You might be doing group interventions. You might be making resources accessible. All sorts of. I mean, it really is incredibly varied, and yeah, I think I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything that I haven't mentioned.
I think you're right. Yes, I think it's never ending, the opportunities that you've got and the things that you can do there. Yes, and things like, you know, a simple thing like somebody's license conditions. You know, when they leave the prison, they may have license conditions, things that they have to do to prevent them being recalled to prison. You know, if you look at those license conditions, they can be so complicated, and a lot of people prisoners just don't understand them, you know. So a simple thing as doing an easy read version of some license conditions can have a really practical and useful benefit.
It's fascinating to hear you talk. And I tell you, the thing that comes across from all of you is that actually you do get an awful lot from your roles. You do get a lot of stimulus, and you do enjoy it. You, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge rewards. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like sunshine and rainbows every single day, but so Midge was talking about simplifying license conditions. So young man been recalled, breached his license 4 times. After the 4th breach, they rang me and said, we're not entirely sure this young person understands their order, and they have to sign the order in order to get released. So they're asked to do you understand, but actually that's by the by. They want to get out, they need to sign this piece of paper, so they sign the piece of paper. It was blatantly clear from speaking to the young person, he had very limited literacy skills and he had significant language difficulties, and he didn't understand the forms that he needed to complete, where he needed to go. We worked with it together. We asked, like, got involved, like, how do you want this presenting? Do you want it written? Do you want some visuals? We broke it down. They didn't come back again. Yes. And we got a phone call from the probation team saying, thank you, why doesn't everyone get this? This is really helpful. And it was, and often it's seen that the individual doesn't want to comply with their order. But often it's not that. They want to be outside. They don't want to be in prison. It's not the like luxury hotel that some newspapers will have you believe. So yeah, it can be really rewarding. It can be a long game, and I'm not going to say that it isn't. So one young person that I was working with, it took them 4 years of me turning up once a month offering my service before they engaged.
Did you say 4 years?
Yeah. It can be a really, really long, slow burn. And then that individual at 19 was ready to engage with me. I knew that we could do some valuable work together. We did that work together. That individual then supported me with training prison officers. And we had a really, really beneficial working partnership together, but it was a long, long time coming.
There are
And
quite a
that's
few
just
other
something you
questions.
don't-
Sorry.
I know, I
Sorry,
was just going to say that's just something you don't get in other services. You don't have that opportunity to go back every month for 4 years. You've got to move on, you have to discharge and move on to the next person on the waiting list. So yeah.
We're
Sorry,
getting
Rob.
quite a lot of other questions in, and I wonder if I could just ask one of them to you, Kim. This question says, do you need any additional training or qualifications beyond your BSc to go into this more specialist area of speech and language therapist work?
Nope.
I know we touched on this before, didn't we?
So as I said, straight from qualifying, I went into forensic mental health. I hadn't had a placement in that area. I'd had 2 hours of teaching in my course on working in that area, but I had a passion and a curiosity, and that was enough. We have transferable skills, and one of the wonderful things about speech and language therapy and your qualification means that you are qualified to work with individuals from the day that they're born to the day that they die. And we have so many transferable skills. You will learn on the job. You learn on every job skills that you need, but no, there is no particular specialist training required in addition.
But it might be quite difficult to get that first post in a prison. And in that instance, should you look to work elsewhere first?
Yeah, and in fact, Eve was saying that we're often called specialist generalists. So having those general broad base of skills is really, really helpful for them going in. So I worked in adult forensic mental health and then went into a young person's prison. And what I was struck by was the amount of young people with speech difficulties who wanted to work on them. And I was like, I haven't done any transcription for 7 years. I'm very rusty. So having that broad base of skills can be really helpful going in. You're never going to have everything, but having skills, experience, awareness of the broader context, nothing's going to hurt. So we've all come in from different areas. So Midge had a dysphagia training before she came into prison service, which is invaluable. I didn't. Eve had a lot more mental health and then the neurology experience before she came in. We know that a high percentage of individuals within the prison estate have acquired brain injuries. Those neurology skills are great. I didn't have those, but I had other skill set that I brought with me. I worked with individuals with learning disabilities in my first post. Individuals within the prison system, there's learning disability overrepresented there. So I had a skill set that I brought. So we all have our own skill set.
So people who are thinking about working in mental health care in prisons, can I turn to you, Eve, with this question? Do you offer placements to students at the London North Mental Health Partnership?
We do, yeah. So we've got contracts with 2 of the London universities, As Kim said, kind of each university will have their own kind of placement system and coordinator. So we do. So I suppose anyone who is a student, it'd be good for them to speak to their own college about kind of links with prisons and secure services. But yeah, certainly we've run placements for MSc students, and this year we're thinking about trying it for BSc students too. One issue is we're not able to kind of film in a prison. So when BSc students are doing their assessment, it can be a bit tricky in a prison, but for all other placements, it's possible.
Eve, have a chat with me, because I got around that when I was taking students who did that assessment in our environments.
I will do, Kim. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. So work placements are possible. Universities work with particular prisons to give students placements, and so that's worth knowing.
Rob, can I just come in on that?
Of course,
because I know there's huge interest from students to work in prison environments, and currently there are a small number of speech and language therapists working in prisons. So not everyone will get an opportunity to work in a prison environment. If you are interested as a student, let the placements team know, but that is not going to be guaranteed, because there is a huge interest and small capacity, but that isn't a barrier to then going on and working in prisons in the future.
As long as you've got that drive and enthusiasm, yeah. I think I'm getting from you that you will probably get there. Can I just pick up on that theme, really, Kim? And this might seem a very general question, but why is it important to have speech and language therapists working in prisons?
Do you want the high level or the nitty gritty? So at the very high level, equity of access for all individuals. So everyone should have equal access to healthcare, no matter where they are. So Lord Ramsbottom, who was Chief Prisons Inspector back in the early 2000s, recognised that there wasn't equity of access to healthcare within the prison estate. So we had prison officers who'd done a first aid course who were acting as healthcare within a prison environment. Now that is not okay. So at a very high level, we need speech and language therapists in this environment to provide equity of access. Practically, why do we need speech and language therapists? So a part of lots of people's case, they have to engage in rehabilitation. That rehabilitation is only effective if the individual can access it. It's often verbally mediated in a group, and we've got individuals with language difficulties who are struggling to access that. So again, parity of access to justice, and financially it just makes sense. So they've done the cost benefit analysis, and providing that speech and language therapist who can identify the needs, support that individual to advocate for themselves, make recommendations to other staff about how to make interventions and license conditions accessible, it pays for itself. So on a social justice level, we're needed. For those individuals to make meaningful change in their life, we're needed. And then on a financial basis, we're needed. So lots of levels.
Brilliant. You've dealt with all of them there. That's lovely. May I turn to you, Midge? And I've just seen a question that's come in from one of the people who's watching, and it's this: is there support if you observe behaviour from staff towards clients that you don't think is appropriate? I think that what they're getting at there is, what is the support for whistleblowers?
Yes, well, that's an interesting one. For sure, yeah. So obviously we're employed by an NHS trust, so we'd be using the NHS whistleblowing policy that we have in place. I think if that were a member of my own team, if it were a member of a different department, if I don't know, prison officer or something, then that's probably something I would be taking back to my manager to discuss with how to take that forward.
While I'm speaking to you, Midge, can I ask about this? And this is about anybody who is working as a speech and language therapist in a prison setting. What measures are in place to support their mental health?
Well, obviously it's going to vary from trust to trust as to what's on offer, but so as Kim was talking about, the importance of supervision. So I get clinical supervision and I get managerial supervision. We have reflective practice within our team as well. I can bring issues to my manager. I kind of also feel that what's important is having a good team around you. So I always feel, if you have had a difficult session, and sometimes you do have a difficult session, there's always somebody in the office that you can come back to and talk it through with.
There is that sense of teamwork then, is there? Because you, as you said, you might have a difficult session with somebody, and then you need to offload to some extent, do you, to one of your colleagues to say, look, this didn't go well and I had a difficult time. How does that work? Do you literally sit down with them over a coffee?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If somebody's around, you can just go and have a chat, and it's because we all know what it's like. We all work in the prison. We all know what it's like. We all know we have difficult sessions, and everyone's very supportive.
It's good to hear. Eve, can I come to you with a question that's come in, and it's this: how is speech and language therapy in prisons changing?
Well, I think it's a really developing area. I mean, I think when I first qualified, there was sort of speech language therapy was starting in the secure hospitals and sort of medium secure units and that kind of thing. And young offenders institutes, but I think it was later to come to adult prisons. And I think since it's got going, there's been this huge appetite for it, and so much so that now it's almost becoming kind of one of the core MDT people in an adult prison. I think the criminal justice system as a whole has really embraced thinking about neurodiversity. So there's been kind of recent publications looking at kind of neurodivergence in prisoners and recognizing their needs as being different in the prison system, and how we must kind of put in place reasonable adjustments for these prisoners. And speech and language therapists are completely integral to that. We're thinking about autistic prisoners, we're thinking about prisoners with learning disability, DLD. So we're needed to kind of adapt all the information they receive verbally, help them navigate the criminal justice system, help other groups work with them, and be part of the team to advise on environmental impacts and so on.
So many, I suppose it's obvious, really, isn't it, that a prison setting does reflect a changing society, and speech and language therapy has to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest growing areas recently as well is the ageing prison population. So with advances in DNA and everything like that, we've got more historical crimes being prosecuted from the 70s and 80s, and we've now got prisoners in their 70s and 80s within the prison estate. And if you think about them as a cross-section of society, we've got more health needs in that group. We've got people who've had strokes, got Parkinson's, dementia. So I know when they were looking at the NICE guidance around the older prisoners and their healthcare needs, that speech and language therapy was again being talked about. And I think that's the biggest change in the last 15-20 years, is that 15-20 years ago, if it wasn't a speech and language therapist waving their hand going, let's think about speech and language therapy, it wasn't happening. And now we've got other professions and other services. The prison service themselves are going, oh, have we thought about speech and language therapy here? And I think that's a big change, and I think it's going to continue to be an area of growth in speech and language therapy over the next decade or two.
That's interesting. Midge, have you seen changes, and are they different from what we've heard of so far?
I think I've only worked in forensics in prisons for 4 years, so yeah, I'm not sure I've got anything else to add, actually. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, all right. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Question here for you though, Midge, is how much direct therapy do you do compared to training?
I would say I did more therapy. We always want to offer training to departments, but everybody is always very time poor. I could see Eve laughing. You know, we would love to do more training, but I think I'm not. So because I missed the beginning bit, I'm not too sure. You know, when you talk about a typical day
Yes.
in prison, you have kind of windows of opportunity in the morning. You have a couple of hours between 9 and 11:30, and then you have an afternoon session between 2 and 4, and those are your specific times when clinical times. Outside of that, the men might be locked up or having their lunch or collecting meals. So within that, you know, I might be seeing two people in a morning in a session. So I would say more direct therapy than training. But within the prison where I am at the moment, we have just recruited another therapist. So I'm hoping that now there's 2 of us, we might be able to increase our offer.
And you know that description you gave of there being particular times during the day when you will have sessions with prisoners, is that common throughout the prison population or prisons across the country?
It is, yes, yes, it is.
Okay. We have a question here. Perhaps I could turn to you, Eve, for this one. Is there an option for flexible working when you're a speech and language therapist in prisons?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some flexibility, maybe not so much as, I don't know, a kind of telehealth job or something like that. But like in my own experience, I was working I think 3.5 days in the prison, but I did them over 3 long days. So I bunched up some of the work so that I didn't go in. I know that some of the OTs, they work 4.5 day weeks, but they do slightly longer days. So they always off on a Friday afternoon. And actually that sometimes works well with the regime in prison, because Friday afternoons can be a bit of a lockdown. So there's pockets of flexibility, I think, but I'm not able to kind of do Teams delivery for therapy or anything like that.
Is it prison? I'm just thinking about prison life. When you first start working in a prison setting, how long does it take to adjust to it? Can I ask you that first, Eve?
I mean, being very honest, a little bit of time. It's quite a sort of overwhelming sort of sensory experience, prison, which is really good to go through, because it gives you that experience of what it's like to be in prison yourself, especially if you're neurodivergent. I mean, it must be very, very hard. It's very noisy. It relies on a lot of officers shouting. You know, there's 5 floors, an officer might be shouting to kind of unlock the 5s. It's hard surfaces. There's no carpet. There's doors banging. There's a lot of people. So it's busy and it can be very noisy. Yeah. So sensory kind of overload. It can be. You do desensitize. You get used to it. But it's a worthwhile experience going through.
I have to say, having worked in secondary schools before I worked in a prison environment, I didn't actually find it that foreign.
That's a good point.
I don't know what that says about secondary schools, but
Midge, what about you?
I think in terms of adjusting, yes, it was quite, because I had a community job before, so I was out and about visiting people in homes. So adjusting to that very closed environment, you've got your keys in your belt, you spend a lot, well, you get used to it, obviously, but at the beginning, there's an awful lot of doors to unlock. It takes you quite a long time to find your way, not get lost in the prison. So there's a really practical stuff, and I do agree with Eve about the sensory overload. It is a very noisy place. Yeah,
and I do think when we're talking about sort of flexible working, that is another thing about a prison environment. If you've got mobility issues, prison environment is not the place to work, because there is a lot of walking in between different environments in order to navigate. And I know, Midge, you said that you do adapt over time. Not everyone does. So I know individuals who thought that they'd be fine in that environment, and they were fine with the caseload, but being in a locked environment, and having 10 doors between yourself and outside was too difficult for some people that I've worked with. So we had a student with us and a therapist who started with us who both left quite quickly because they realized that wasn't the environment for them. And most people will adapt, but acknowledging the fact that it is different and it isn't right for everyone. I find it a security blanket and I quite like it, but that isn't going to be the same for everyone.
Of course, that's great, very honest as well. There's a question that's come in, and I know we touched on this earlier on, but I just think it's probably worth us just looking at again. And the question is, what banding is needed to work in prisons? And I've heard you say band 5, but could you just take us through that again, Kim? Would you mind?
So most prison posts currently are individuals working on their own within a prison, and it is a specialist environment. Therefore, it is likely that they are going to be band 7 posts in acknowledgement of the fact that you're working on your own. You may well be building the service from scratch, and you're working on your own. However, as things are expanding, there are now more opportunities. So when I started, I said I set up the service. I went in as a band 7 to my second prison role. We then created another post, which was a band 5 to 6 development post, because there were lots of interest from those band 5s who were coming through university, had a bit of teaching about it, were really enthusiastic and wanted to get involved. But then they had a development post to come up to band 6. So the predominant post will be a band 7. However, in larger teams, there are 6s and 5s. I would be very, very wary of where a new post is created. You're going to be on your own and going in, and that was banded at a 5 or a 6. I don't think that acknowledges what you need to do. You need that skill and confidence and experience to go in to be creating something from scratch.
Thank you,
Rob,
Kim.
can I just follow on from that? So just as Kim said, so we're quite lucky at the moment in the North London partnership that we've got some roles, but we're lucky in that we've got band 6 and band 7 roles within the prison. So it does offer the progression. between, and some leadership within the prison. And we've potentially also got another role that might be banded as 5 to 6 development post, but within the team, so that you've got the experience there to support you.
Funnily enough, Eve, I was just going to come to you and say what speech and language therapist roles are available in the North London Mental Health Partnership at the moment. In broad terms, what are they?
So there are 2 out for advert at the moment, and they can be accessed through the Barnet Enfield and Haringey website, the vacancies, or from NHS Jobs. And there's soon to be another, which will be a band 6, possibly the band 5 to 6 role, but the 2 that are after the band 7 roles.
And Midge, to you, a very practical question. Where do people look? Where are jobs advertised for working in mental health care in prison settings?
NHS Jobs, that is the best place to go. NHS Job website, that's where you'll find the jobs. Yeah.
Lovely.
The only exception to that is that there are some private prisons, and they wouldn't necessarily be then advertised by NHS Jobs, but they can often be on RCSLT, through the Bulletin magazine, and also there's the Clinical Excellence Network for people working in that area, and often services will reach out and say, we've got a post coming up to advert, and then that'll get cascaded around to the mailing list.
Splendid. And Eve, do you offer placements to students at North London Mental Health Partnership?
Yeah, we do. So we work with 2 London universities at the moment. So they're going strong, and we've done them for a few years now.
That's great. We're coming nearly to the end of our time here, but I'd like to come to each of you in turn, if I may, before we end, and ask this question. What single piece of advice would you give to a speech and language therapist wanting to work in a prison setting? Can I start with you, Midge, please?
Yeah, I think I would say focus on what you know, not what you don't know. We mentioned earlier about transferable skills. Don't think, because I haven't worked in a forensic setting, I won't be able to get this job, because you have got a lot of skills. Whatever job it is that you've done, you'll be able to use those skills in a prison, in a forensic setting. So that would be
your
piece
advice.
Of advice. Yeah.
What about you, Kim? What advice would you offer?
Be willing to play the long game. The posts aren't abundant. There aren't lots of them out there. So if you have a passion in the area, stick to it. Look at what opportunities you might be able to create in your area. So is there a local prison that doesn't have a speech and language therapy service and you can offer to go in and do some training? Or is there somebody who might need an assessment? And take a chance. So I was working in the Midlands, saw a role come up in London. I couldn't afford to buy in London because prices are very high, but I rented my house out and took that opportunity in London. I realised not everyone can do that, but play the long game. Opportunities will come along, but also be part of creating those opportunities.
Kim, thanks. What about you, Eve, very quickly?
Very quickly, join the Criminal Justice Sen. That's a good place where lots of jobs are advertised as well. Some prisons do offer visits and open days. So especially if you see jobs being advertised, do approach the person that's in the advert and see if they can offer an open day.
That's splendid. Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of this webinar. We hope you've been able to get some pointers from our panelists to explode some myths and give you an insight into working in prison mental health care settings. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Kim, Eve and Midge, and to our partners at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. Thank you to everyone who has sent in a question, and thank you very much for watching. We hope it's been helpful.